Welcome to the 5th episode of Formation in the Augustinian Charism. My name is Father Martin Navarro, and I'm of the Oblates of St. Augustine. This episode will present the contemplative character of the Augustinian Charism and St. Augustine's teaching of the Ascension of the soul to God. As always, let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Lord, let me know myself and know you, and desire nothing except only you. Let me despise myself and love you. Let me do everything for the sake of you. Let me humble myself and exalt you. Let me think of nothing except you. Let me die to myself and live in you. Let me accept whatever happens as from you. Let me banish self and follow you, and ever desire to follow you. Let me fly from myself and take refuge in you, that I may desire to be defended by you. Let me fear for myself, let me fear you, and let me be among those who are chosen by you. Let me distrust myself and put my trust in you. Let me be willing to obey for the sake of you. Let me cling to nothing except only you, and let me be poor because of you. Look upon me that I may love you. Call me that I may see you, and forever enjoy you. Amen. Having arrived this far, it should be clear that the foundation of the Augustinian Charism that we've seen formulated by the constitutions and rule of life consists in the doctrine of the three loves: chaste or contemplative love, ordered or communitarian love, and diffusive or apostolic love. While the charism can be stated simply in this manner, it hardly expressed adequately the richness and depth of the meaning contained in each of the three loves. The understanding and expression of the charism, therefore, can always be embellished and deepened. In the following lectures, it is my intention to analyze and enrich the philosophical and ascetical teachings of St. Augustine contained in the doctrine of the three loves, placing emphasis on the concepts that have already been sufficiently developed. My approach, then, will be to speak of each of the loves separately, hoping that analyzing each of the parts will help to better understand the whole. Contemplative character. The terminology used to name and describe this characteristic of the charism presents some challenges in its comprehension, using words and phrases such as contemplation, chaste love, love and do what you want, disinterested love, renewal of the image, dispersion of the spirit, Christ the interior master, recollection, illumination, interiority, transcendence, and transcendent interiorization. Over time, many of these words may have acquired additional and contrary meanings. Therefore, to assist in understanding their proper interpretation, the very life of St. Augustine will be used to provide the testimony for his doctrine. Contemplative Augustinian spirituality. Being a contemplative for the Christian and for the religious means to be in search for God and to surrender yourself totally to Him as your ultimate end. The end or purpose of the Christian life is to aspire to an intimate union with God in such a way that, already in this life, we begin to participate in the happiness and joy of heaven, in the possession of God, the supreme good. Mental prayer has always been considered as one of the most efficient means to arrive at this union with God. Let's ask ourselves, is there a spirituality specifically Augustinian? Was St. Augustine a real contemplative? Is there a method that St. Augustine used that is sure to help others become contemplatives? Many historians and theologians who have studied the works of St. Augustine are in agreement that there exists in his works definitive principles that allow us to speak of an Augustinian spirituality, and a method of meditation or contemplation that distinguishes his spirituality from others. His method is not taught in the same way as those of St. Ignatius or St. Francis de Sales, but nevertheless, teaching principles are there. Dom Cuthbert Butler, Benedictine abbot and author whose specialty was the history of Western mysticism, considered St. Augustine as the father of Western mystics, and considered the saint among the great teachers of spirituality. For Butler, St. Augustine was the prince of mystics, because he unified within himself, in a way unmatched by anyone else, the most penetrating intellectual vision of divine truths with a passionate love for God. point of departure. In Augustinian spirituality, what are the steps that lead the soul to union with God? What stages mark the way of contemplation or loving search for the truth? What are the levels by which the soul elevates itself in its ascension towards God? To present Augustinian doctrine in a systematic way, the appropriate method must be that which best reflects the thought of St. Augustine. For him, the point of departure in the search for the truth is rooted in the desire for happiness, which is common for all men, because, quote, the only cause that makes man to philosophize is to be happy, end quote. For the Augustinian, the happy life is identical with wisdom, and since we all desire happiness, we all desire wisdom too. Following then the example of St. Augustine, the beginning of this exposition is given to the most famous text written by St. Augustine, with the phrase most cited in the history of spirituality, with a phrase so rich with meaning and fecund in doctrinal application that, around it, turns the whole Augustinian ascetical system. This phrase has merited to be classified as the great mystical premise. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. These famous words with which St. Augustine opened his confessions are the key that gives us access to his doctrinal system. They synthesize his philosophical and theological thought. Man, having been created by God and made in his image and likeness, God put in the heart of man an innate desire for happiness, not of a temporal or relative happiness, but of a complete and eternal happiness. Therefore, if man busies himself with disrupting the plans of God, and searches for his repose not in the eternal stability which is God, but in the insecurities of the transitory, he will be victim of the restlessness, disquietude, and anxiety that will torture his existence. Being that in Augustinian thought happiness is identical with the possession of wisdom, it is important to analyze the nature of this wisdom. What is the wisdom that makes man happy? Is it philosophical wisdom? Can this wisdom make us perfectly happy in this world? Can it, at the very least, serve as a vehicle towards the eternal truth, which is identical with the highest good, summum bonum, which as its fruit will make man eternally happy? Or is faith necessary, which purifies the heart and leads to beatitude? These questions flow from the very core of St. Augustine's teaching. Giving it a more modern version, we can ask, did St. Augustine situate himself on a purely natural plane? Did he not know of the elevation of man to the supernatural order? Should we classify St. Augustine as a Neoplatonic philosopher or as a Christian theologian? Was there progress in his doctrine? Is Augustinian philosophy an adequate instrument to lead us to the beatific vision? To respond to these questions, we must make a distinction. The philosopher of Cassiciacum and author of the Dialogues, written before his baptism, is not the same as the hammer of the Pelagian heresy. St. Augustine is the first to recognize the progress he made in the comprehension of Christian mysteries. The same must be said of his progressive rise on the path of perfection. It is certain that already in the Cassiciacum period, the philosophical inquiries to which he was dedicated were not merely intellectual exercises. For St. Augustine, philosophy is a way of approachment to God. In this era, however, he exaggerated the efficacy of philosophy as an instrument to effect union with God. He believed, as written in De Beata Vita and in the Soliloquies, that it was possible for man to obtain a perfect knowledge of God, and thus obtain happiness in this life. From this comes his insistence on the identification of wisdom with happiness. He corrects his exaggeration in his work titled Retractions. Later, in writing De Trinitate and the Enchiridion, St. Augustine insists on the preponderant part of, and almost exclusively, that which corresponds to piety, identifying wisdom with piety, and with this, worship of God. It would be, however, an error to exaggerate the small existent divergences between St. Augustine and dialogues and, for example, the doctrine of the Trinity. The philosopher recently converted was also a believer, and he didn't ignore the sacred scriptures. In them, he learned, by divine authority, that the wisdom which philosophy seeks after is identical with the uncreated wisdom that is God. From created philosophical wisdom, the true philosopher ascends to the uncreated wisdom, that is, the Son of God. Beatitude will consist, then, in the conquest of the supreme wisdom. The object of perfect happiness must be eternal, and, given that eternal truth is also the highest good, complete and perfect beatitude will consist ultimately in the knowledge and love of the highest truth and of the supreme good, which is God. Later, he will insist that complete happiness is not accessible in this life, but that it is reserved for the future, and that it necessarily requires the divine gift of faith that works through charity. That being said, let's now ask whether St. Augustine is a Neoplatonic philosopher or a Christian theologian. There is no dilemma, because he's both. His philosophy is distinguished from his theology, but neither can the two be separated. Reason and authority are not opposed to one another, because both are derived from the same and one eternal truth, and lead to it. The philosophy and theology of St. Augustine form a unity, without confusing the two. Unity of reason that leads to the faith, and unity of faith that illuminates and elevates reason. The principal text upon which we commented reflects the influence of Neoplatonic philosophy on St. Augustine. Everything proceeding from one, they must return to one to find rest. The dispersion of the soul in the multiplicity of material things causes restlessness and creates emptiness in it. We came from God, we must return to God. God is the font of our origin. To him we must return as our end. Stages of Ascension. What is the method of ascension of the soul to contemplation of God? St. Augustine is in debt to the Neoplatonic philosophy for the so-called method of stages, or steps by which the soul ascends to God, as much as in the intellectual aspect as in the moral, the purification of the heart. The point of departure of the ascension towards the knowledge of God is sensible creation, proceeding after by the stages through the external and internal senses to arrive at the soul, that then judges according to the rules of immutable and eternal truth that later identifies with God. These stages don't need to be considered isolated from one another. They are better said links of one and the same chain, and all of them are necessary in the itinerary of the mind toward God. The passages in which St. Augustine exposes the spiritual ascensions of his soul to God display an everlasting beauty. Classic is the passage in which the seraphim of Hippo, totally inflamed in the love of God, travels the troubled creation to heaven, and to earth, and to all of the elements, and above all to the King of creation, back to man, so that they may each say something to him of the perfections of God that they love. And what is this? I asked the earth, and it answered, I am not he. And whatsoever are therein made the same confession. I asked the sea, and the depths, and the creeping things that lived, and they replied, We are not your God. Seek higher than we. I asked the breezy air, and the universal air with its inhabitants answered, Anaximenes was deceived. I am not God. I asked the heavens, the sun, moon, and stars. Neither, they say, are we the God whom you seek. And I answered unto all these things which stand above the door of my flesh. You have told me concerning my God that you are not he. Tell me something about him. And with a loud voice they exclaimed, He made us. My questioning was my observing of them, and your beauty was their reply. And I directed my thoughts to myself, and said, Who are you? And I answered, A man. And lo, in me there appear both body and soul, the one without, the other within. By which of these should I seek my God, whom I had sought through the body from earth to heaven, as far as I was able to send messengers, the beams of my eyes? but the better part is that which is inner. For to it, as both president and judge, did all these my corporeal messengers render the answers of heaven and earth and all things therein, who said, We are not God, but he made us. These things was my inner man cognizant of by the ministry of the outer. I, the inner man, knew all of this. I, the soul, through the senses of my body. I asked the vast bulk of the earth of my God, and it answered me, I am not he, but he made me. To know in order to love. St. Augustine was hungry and thirsty for God. Therefore, he searched for him without ever letting up. His whole life was a pilgrimage for the truth. When he found him, he searched for him again, dedicating all of the talents of his genius to exploring his inexhaustible riches. In the philosophy theology of St. Augustine, the mind is never separated from the heart. His theology is characterized by its fruitful nature. We are seeing how the desire for happiness is the starting point in the investigation for the truth. The theology of the mind, which searches for the truth, runs parallel with the theology of the heart, that desires the conquest of the supreme truth and of the highest good, in order to rest in them and see fulfilled the most profound aspirations of the soul. To describe the stages by which man elevates himself to God, the efforts of St. Augustine have a predominantly ascetical tone. He doesn't pretend to give a rational demonstration of the existence of God. He searches for God to know him better. He wants to know him better, to love him more. Science has as its aim sapiential knowledge, as its fruitful joy is the truth. Thus we see how to finalize the so-called Augustinian argument to prove the existence of God. St. Augustine exhorts his interlocutor Evodius. I promised to demonstrate to you, if you remember, that I had something that was much more sublime than our spirit and our reason. Here you have it. It is the same truth. Embrace it if you can. Place your joy in it, and take joy in the Lord, and he will concede to you the petitions of your heart. Because what more do you ask for than to be happy and blessed? And who is more blessed than he that finds joy in the never-ending, unchanging, and most excellent truth? The large text from Confession cited earlier, while demonstrating the psychology of love, which does not cease in its desire to know more and more about the object love, is also a typical exponent of the method of stages that St. Augustine uses. From the universe ascends to man, from the external to the internal senses, from these to the soul, which judge everything in the tribunal of the mind according to the rules of and illuminated by the eternal truth. God is above the senses. God is above the soul. But the soul precisely as the means, St. Augustine would be elevated to union with God, with the God he loves. What is it, then, that I love when I love God? Who is he that is above my soul? Through my own soul I will rise up to him. All of what has been said introduces us to the subject of interiority and transcendence that is characteristic of the Augustinian spirituality, as will we see in the following episodes. So question number 1. Already having identified the Augustinian Charism, we have begun our detailed presentation. Can you enumerate some of the terms that are used in the Confessions and in the Rule of Life regarding the contemplative aspect of the Charism? Have you familiarized yourself with these terms? Do you see the need to study the mind of St. Augustine in this respect? Is there a fundamental need to speak of an Augustinian method of contemplation? Number 2. Can we classify St. Augustine as a contemplative soul? According to the saint, what is the starting point in the itinerary of the mind toward God? What is the wisdom that St. Augustine identified with the possession of happiness? Did he ever have a change of mind? Number 3. The first step toward union with God by the means of knowledge and love is the ardent desire of the soul to possess God. What steps does St. Augustine travel in his search for the truth and highest good that is God? Does St. Augustine increase the importance and value of the dimension of love? Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Augustinian Charism. I hope you're enjoying these series. Please leave your comments in the comment section on this video and any further questions you may have regarding the Augustinian Charism. See you guys next week. God bless. The Oblates of St. Augustine was founded by Father John Melnick, formerly a member of the Order of St. Augustine and of the Pontifical Commission Ecclesia Dei. Father John's dream was to defend and preserve the traditional Augustinian charism against the attacks from modernist bishops seeking to destroy the traditional Catholic faith and religious life.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Beginning during the months in 2020, when Catholic bishops made it nearly impossible to attend Mass and receive the last rites, Father John founded the Oblates of St. Augustine to preach the traditional Catholic faith, provide the sacraments according to the traditional Roman rite, and live the traditional Augustinian religious life to merit grace for the world. Living a mendicant charism, the Oblates of St. Augustine is supported entirely by the alms of its generous benefactors. You can visit our website to learn more about how you can support this mission at www.westonmonks.org. God bless you.